Tonight's class, we're going to talk about how to think critically about abortion. And this class is really part 10 now of our series on Utopia and the Prisoner's Dilemma. It's all about rational decision making and how to really think critically about things, especially when we make decisions. So I want to remind everybody first, I show these two equations whenever we talk about game theory and rational decision making. And basically, the definition of rational decision making is we consider all of our choices, we form a score representing the outcome of each of the choices, and then we pick the choice that produces the best score. And so it all kind of boils down to how do we form our scores. So the first equation says that there's a score that is basically a weighted sum of the scores involving everybody in my decision. Okay, so when it comes to abortion, there are a number of people or entities that are involved in the decision. There's the mother, there's the father, there's the family, there's society, and then there's the baby. Okay, so we have multiple kind of scores for the choices that we make when we talk about abortion. And then the weighting factor tells us how important is the score of each of these people in our decision making. Okay, and then the second equation says, okay, but if we're going to form a score for each person involved in my decision, there are different parts of it. For example, there's an intrinsic outcome, like if I make a business deal, how much money do I make? There may be rewards and penalties that are imposed on the choices that I make. So, for example, if I decide to rob a bank, there may be a penalty that if I get caught, I'm going to have to go to jail. Or if I, perhaps donate money to charity or do some good thing, perhaps I get a tax credit or a tax write-off. And then there's sort of the moral side of things. There's the battle between our conscience and our fleshy desires. And of course, we believe as Christians that when we're saved, the Holy Spirit kind of enters us, and we now have a God sort of led conscience, and everything begins to change in how we think about our moral decisions. All right, so just keep this in mind that as we're going to think rationally about abortion, you could imagine maybe you're a woman who's pregnant and you're contemplating, should I have an abortion? And what are the factors that are going to go in her decision? And perhaps, maybe she's not the one making the decision. And you can look at each party in the whole thing, in the whole decision-making process and ask how would they form their scores. All right. So just a little bit of kind of a background to kind of set the stage for what I really want to talk about. We've talked a lot about how the human mind thinks and some of the flaws in how we think, or maybe we're overly confident about how we think about things, and what are the mistakes that we're making. And the first thing I want to just talk about is something that we've talked a lot about actually in the past, ideology. And so I just wanted to look up the definition of ideology, and according to the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, the 5th edition, they define ideology as a set of doctrines or beliefs that are shared by the members of a social group or that form the basis of a political, economic, or other system. So it's kind of like, here are a set of beliefs that a collective believes. Okay? And you could even, if you take it even further, the more you're attached to an ideology, the more you're attached to a particular worldview, that begins to kind of define what Freud was talking about when he talked about ego. Ego isn't that I think I'm so great, but it's that this is what I believe to be true and who I am, and nobody can budge me from that. I have such a strong attachment to what I believe to be true and who I think I am. And if anybody challenges that, I feel like you're attacking me because that's who I am, right? So somebody might say to a gay person, I think homosexuality is wrong. And the gay person would say, why are you attacking me? And the person would say, I'm not attacking you. I'm just stating my belief. And you can kind of see how a lot of people, when you challenge their worldview, they actually think you're personally attacking them, because if their worldview isn't true and they identify themselves with their worldview, then you're destroying them if you destroy their worldview by arguments. So they feel that that's an attack. It's really like a fight for survival. Now, we also talked about another related kind of a thinking mistake, and that was the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's basically defined by Wikipedia. It's a cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. It's sort of this overconfidence that people have about themselves. Overconfidence, perhaps, in one's worldview. It kind of ties back to ideology and ego. And, people who describe the Dunning-Kruger effect, really talk about like how do you argue with people that are overconfident but they don't realize how dumb they are. And you can't use logic with people who do not think logically. And it's very, very frustrating because illogical people think they're so correct in what they believe that you can't argue with them, even though you can prove logically that they don't know what they're talking about. So we have these two effects, and they kind of feed each other. And there really is a problem when people are with 100% certainty. They believe that whatever it is that they believe is true. And you can look at religion and sort of faith. And people, you can almost say, I believe in crazy things. So God, look at me. My faith is amazing because I believe all kinds of crazy stuff. And it sort of feeds this sort of wrong thinking, right? Because I don't think we believe that the Bible is filled with all kinds of crazy things. We think it's all rational and true, and somebody with a brain should be able to think through it and come to the conclusion that it's true. Not like, oh, things are so crazy, but I believe it. Especially like if you think the Bible says 1 + 1 is 3, and since the Bible says it, it must be true. Well, maybe our interpretation of the Bible isn't right, or something is not right, And a lot of people believe things that when you dig deep into it, they're logically inconsistent. It cannot possibly be true. Yet people sort of fall back on their faith. And you might have the same thing with science. Science pointing to atheism. Scientists might say, I don't believe in miracles, which makes me a great scientist because I think I can prove everything with science and I don't need God. And they sort of get this artificial reinforcement that way as well. And so, we get to this thing that I've talked a lot about, truth seekers versus defenders of the faith. A defender of the faith would be someone who is, sort of suffering from an ideology and the Dunning-Kruger effect, who is so confident about what they believe to be true that they're going to defend it at all costs, even if it makes no sense. Whereas a truth seeker would be someone who says, look, I'm not sure what's true. Let me listen to all the arguments and I'll try to, analyze everything critically, think critically about all the different positions. But if I can't prove something to be true, or I can't prove things to be false, I won't immediately discard those beliefs. That's more the mindset of a truth seeker, someone with maybe a little more humility towards trying to understand what really is true. Now, in rational decision making, combining ideology with Dunning-Kruger really leads to a huge mistake. And I think this is the mistake that everybody is making when they talk about abortion. And that is, they say, well, this is what I believe, and then they lock in with 100% certainty or 0% certainty about things that they don't believe are true, even though they have no right, really, believing with certainty what they believe, right? So you might, and so let me give you some examples of that. I've used this example before, but suppose you're a brilliant scientist with a new theory to create unlimited clean energy out of thin air. You're 90% confident that the theory will work, but there's a 10% chance it will create a giant black hole that will swallow up the entire galaxy, destroying all life in the process. Should you do it? And of course, I think most people say, well, I believe it will work. So yeah, that's what I think. 90%. But they're not thinking 90%. They're thinking, yeah, I believe it'll work. So I'm locked in. I'm going to make my decision as if I was 100% certain. Let me give you another example. Suppose you're a brilliant virologist with a new miracle vaccine to cure all illnesses. You're 90% confident that the vaccine will work, but there's a 10% chance that will kill everybody within 3 years who take the vaccine. Should you do it? That's starting to hit home. We've got these experimental vaccines that, 95% effective. And then now we start finding out all these side effects, long-term issues with the immune system. Maybe it wasn't even 90% effective. In fact, there was a report that came out saying that the Pfizer vaccine maybe was really only about 12.5% effective. And, there's a lot of issues on that. But the question is, should you vaccinate the entire population of the world? Thinking, 90%. But if you believe it'll work, you sort of act as if it's 100%. Here's another example. Suppose you're a brilliant chemist with a new miracle way to create baby formula in the laboratory. You're 90% confident that the baby formula will work, but there's a 10% chance that it will kill every baby within 3 years who take the formula. Should you do it? And here we go again, right? We're having baby formula shortages. And now we find out that Bill Gates, is investing in this new baby formula stuff that's cooked up in a lab. Okay, here's another one. Suppose you're a brilliant farmer with a new miracle farming technique to improve crops. You're 90% confident that the new technique will work, but there's a 10% chance that it will poison everybody within 3 years who eat the food, and everybody who eats it will die. Should you bring this new way of doing farming onto the world and have everybody eat your food? I think it'll work, right? So the sort of ideologist Dunning-Kruger person locks in and says, that's it. And they sort of discard all other possibilities because they seem pretty confident it'll work. So it sort of turns into 100% confidence that it will work. Here's another one. Suppose you are a politician with a new political theory to improve global society. You were 90% confident that the new political theory will work, but there's a 10% chance that it will fall into the hands of an evil dictator who will enslave the world. Should you do it? Here's another one. Suppose you are an expert in artificial intelligence with a new technology to improve the human mind through social media. You are 90% confident that the new technology theory will work, but there's a 10% chance that it will destroy free will and turn people into drones. Should you do it? And I think this is the last one. Suppose you are an expert in surveillance intelligence with a new technology to monitor every human being on the planet. You are 90% confident that the new technology theory will eliminate crime and improve the lives of citizens, but there's a 10% chance that it will fall into corrupt hands and be used to abuse people. Should you do it? And each one of these examples that I've given, you can almost think of, if it works, it's almost like an infinite benefit. Just imagine being able to create energy out of thin air. That's like almost an infinite benefit. Or being able to cure illness, or to solve starvation, or to eliminate crime, or to have a new political theory that creates utopia, right? All of these things, if they were to work, would have almost an infinitely beneficial outcome. But there's a small chance that if they don't work, it has an almost infinitely bad outcome, maybe an infinitely bad outcome. So we're dealing with things that really have probabilities, but people mistakenly simply say, well, because I think it'll work, they sort of throw out everything else, and the way they make decisions, they act like the probability is actually 100% when it isn't 100%, and all of the bad things, the bad outcomes, are 0%. So they make their decisions that way. And but it also involves infinities, which also create problems in the decision-making process. Now, we talked about this way back when we talked about Pascal's wager, and we sort of debunked the people who were debunking Pascal's wager. And we kind of showed that even Pascal was missing some key points because he didn't quite have the right scoring system for making decisions. But we're going to sort of get back to that because the same sort of technique applies to the subject of abortion. All right, so we just gave a whole bunch of examples of decisions that potentially have this almost infinite benefit if it's successful, but if it's wrong, it leads to an almost infinite score for the outcome if it fails. So it's sort of almost like infinite benefit, but catastrophic results if it fails. And let's suppose there was 100 of these decisions. Okay, so it's not really right to just look at one at a time, because we're trying to establish, okay, what is really, the principle behind making these decisions? Because if the principle is, yes, you should do it, then you would apply the same principle to every one of these. And now when you have 100 of them, the probability of catastrophe is basically 1 minus the probability of every one of them being successful, right? So if every one of them is successful, then you won't have a catastrophe. But if any one of them is, fails, then you have a catastrophe that potentially wipes out all life in the galaxy, right? So the probability of catastrophe is 1 minus p of success, the probability of success, to the nth power. And if n is 100 and the probability of success is 0.9, then, and you have 100 of these, then the probability of at least one of these things creating a catastrophe is 0.99997, almost 100%. And the answer is no, you should not do it. Okay, so, when you're dealing with these infinities, even if it might be, a high probability, like for example, I might go to Las Vegas and gamble, and like there's a 90% chance. If I was betting on something with a 90% chance, would I bet my life? Maybe I make $10,000, but if I lose my life. I wouldn't bet that, right? Even though it's only 10% chance that I would lose my life or something. So you have to weigh when you make the decisions, the probabilities, but also you have to correctly score the outcomes of success, and you have to score the outcomes of failures. And when the scores become involving infinities, that kind of starts changing the equations. All right. Now, okay, so I basically said all the bullets, the last 3 bullets. All right. Now, here were some things just to kind of warm us up a little bit. If men can have babies and abortions, how is abortion a woman's right to choose when we can't even define what a woman is? If abortion is all about my body, my choice, as in my house is my castle, where I can make the choices in my castle, does that make it okay to kill your children in your house? Here's another one. If the baby or the fetus is just some tissue that is part of the mother's body, why does it have its own DNA? And here was a dialogue between a congressman and someone in Congress, I guess, I don't know what you call it, not testifying, but sort of arguing their position. So the pro-abortion congressman basically said, what about incest and rape? And the response was, okay, if we concede on that, will you change your vote? And of course, the congressman who was pro-abortion, he was like, oh, I give back my time. And he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to respond, because it's obvious that it really isn't about incest and rape. I mean, I think a lot of anti-abortion people, pro-life people, would say, all right, look, if we give you that, can we stop these abortions, these elective abortions? And of course, that's not what the issue is about. All right. Some issues with abortion. So the first question is, when does the growing baby or fetus, I'm kind of trying to use both terms to be more neutral, in the womb become human? And we argue all over the place on that. How valuable is human life? Are we really talking about if we abort a baby, that's murder and that has an infinitely bad outcome? Or maybe it's okay to just kill human life. How valuable really is human life? Who is involved in the scoring scheme, and how are they weighted? Is it the mother? Is the father able to make the decision? How about society? Like, for example, China, used to have their one child kind of law, so they would have forced abortions. And then what are the costs when you form your score? What's the score, in other words, of having the baby versus aborting the baby? And you start thinking about, well, my life would be kind of messed up. But if I, don't have the baby, then there are potentially other issues too. And, maybe you count the score of the baby in the decision, and the baby's life isn't as important, but you might say, who cares about the baby? I'm just going to make the decision for what's best for me because I'm selfish. And so there are all kinds of things in how we compute the cost of having the baby versus aborting the baby. And we have to remember that, when we form the score, it's not just instantaneously at a point in time, because really what you have to do is ask, how does this score sort of get computed over, let's say, the lifetime of myself and everyone involved, and the baby? Because sure, you might say, well, right now the baby, doesn't really care, whatever, but in 20 years, when this child is 20 years old or so, now they're starting to appreciate life, and you have to really integrate the score over time, because it's not just an instantaneous outcome. And the mother, 20 years later, if she has the abortion, might be like tormenting herself every day about this baby that she could have had, that she intentionally terminated. So we have to remember that the decisions are integrated over time. And then finally, as I said before, who gets to make the decision, and what are the decision makers' values? And it involves certainly the mother, potentially the father, family, society, or you can think of that as government, and the baby itself. So I think the first thing that everybody debates about is, when does human life begin? And, I think religious people believe, okay, human life starts at inception, and, that the soul of this baby happens right, enters into the baby right at conception. And so I've drawn this thing, even though it looks like it happens slightly after conception. I only drew it that way so that you could see the line, because I can't, if I drew it right on top, you wouldn't be able to see it. Another time might be when a heartbeat is detectable. And I looked this up, and it turns out right around 6 weeks, you can actually detect kind of like an electric signal from the heart, even though the heart isn't really fully formed. And but something is going on in that region, and that's why some of the 6-week sort of bans on abortion are called heartbeat bills. People generally agree that right around 8 weeks, the baby will feel pain. So as you kill the baby, it's suffering. Right around somewhere between 4 and 5 months, the heart is formed. So if you do a sonogram, or you can actually see the heart of the baby beating and everything. Right around 21 weeks, maybe a little bit more, seems to be when the baby, at least with current science, is viable. They can, if a baby is born after 21 weeks, there's a chance they can save the baby. And here's another one, sort of a gradual, that this baby sort of gradually becomes human life. And it doesn't have to be a straight line, but I drew it as a straight line. But all these other, views essentially say it's not a human life until a heartbeat, and then it just shoots up from 0 to 100%. 0% human life, and then, now it has a heartbeat, so now it's 100%, as if this makes any sense. Or feeling pain. It's 0 until it can feel pain, or it's 0 until the heart is actually formed, or it's 0 until on its own it could survive. And someone else would say, no, it's got to be something gradual, and it's kind of intuitive, actually. The more mature the baby becomes, it sort of makes sense that you would think of more of a gradual. But, what does it mean? Like, let's say you're 4.5 months in, and now you're at, it's 50% human life. Well, what does it mean to terminate someone who's 50% human? Is that 50% murder? And is 50% murder, if murder is basically an infinitely bad thing to do, 50% of infinity is still infinity. And so, the gradual approach, which is not that unreasonable, really. I mean, it's, you could sort of understand. I mean, we know at conception it's not yet, before conception, it's not a human, but certainly when it's born, it is a human. And we got to get from 0 to 100% somehow. It's probably more realistic to talk about this thing being a continuous curve. Maybe it's a sharp curve that goes almost up to 100%, like the 2 milliseconds after conception, and then it flattens out. But it's reasonable to think that you're going from 0 to 100% in some sort of a smooth curve, not just it's 0 and then it shoots up to 100% at some artificially defined, point. There's no reason why, a heart, being able to detect an electric signal from the heart, that now makes you 100% human, and prior to that you're not, or feeling pain, or any of these things. It's all made up. Nobody knows they're really true on this. And even, we might look at the Bible and be able to use the Bible to prove that, it's at conception. But we should step back and say, but what if the Bible isn't true? Right? What if we were to say, I'm about 98.5% confident the Bible is true, so I've committed my life to that. But what if it's not true? And I should be able to, discuss, how is abortion moral, with someone who says, well, I think there's about a 1.5% chance that the Bible is true, but most likely there is no God. But they're also being at least somewhat reasonable. They're not saying with 100% certainty there is no God. Just like it's really not reasonable with 100% certainty to say God exists and it's the God of the Bible. Even though we can commit to our faith in something that we're not 100% certain. And then you actually have people that say, all right, look, half the baby is now sticking out of the womb, the head, but it's still okay. Partial birth abortion is okay. And of course, the pro-life people say, well, wait a minute, what's so special about, just partly, still in the womb? That means it's not life yet? I mean, that doesn't even make sense. And they'll go even further. What about, after the baby's born? And I was listening to one woman being interviewed. She said, she just kept saying, it's the woman's choice. Well, how about, 2 days after birth? It's still a woman's choice, woman's body, woman's choice. Well, how about 2 years after birth? It's the mother's choice. It's the woman's choice. I'm like, holy cow. I mean, what kind of insanity is this? Um, this sort of locking in to some ideology. It's almost like a mantra. It's the woman's body, it's the woman's choice. She can do whatever she wants with this baby that she created. you know um, and you begin to realize this is absolute insanity. How about when the baby is 30 years old? Is it still the woman's choice, the mother's choice? She can kill her children anytime she wants. And so the discussions become at some point kind of ridiculous. And it, in a way, it brings you back to the question: how valuable is human life? We want to believe human life is sort of sacred. It's taking an innocent human life has an infinitely negative score. You would never do that. But maybe not everybody has that same feeling. So let's keep going. All right, so this is basically the last slide, and it brings back in our how do we make our decision, right? So now imagine you're the mother, you're the father, you're a member of the family, you're the government, let's say, trying to make a decision what's best for society, and then the last one might be you're the baby, okay? And the question is, should I have an abortion? I sort of phrased it like it was the mother, but should there be an abortion, okay? And so if the answer is yes, then you might ask the question, is the unborn baby a human life? And we don't know where to draw the line, but everybody might sort of have their own way of thinking of it, okay? But nobody really knows what's correct. So there should be some uncertainty, really. And the answer, and you might even say, is the unborn baby a human life at some point in time? But the answer always comes back, I don't know. And I could be wrong. There's a certain probability, even at any point in time of the pregnancy, there's a probability that it is a human life and therefore sacred. And if so, we're committing murder. And how do we score murder? Maybe murder's not so bad. Maybe murder's great. Or maybe murder is, sacred and it has an infinitely bad score. But that's only if it's true, only if the baby is a human life. If it's not true, it would be 1 minus p, 1 minus the probability of being true. And, if that's the case, you have an abortion and it wasn't a human life, with a certain probability, and you have an improved life. You would have had this baby, it would have tied you down, maybe it would have been harder to go to school or hold down a job. Maybe you would have been socially ostracized. So you might argue that if you have this baby that you really don't want and get an abortion and it's not a human life, your life improves. Okay. But if you're wrong, it's murder. But maybe murder's not so bad, right? It's the person who's forming the score has to assess that. Now, you go the other way. Should I have an abortion? And if the answer is no, I shouldn't have the abortion. And you could then ask the same question: is the unborn baby a human life? If it's true, then yes, you've preserved a sacred life. This child that you're going to have is sacred. You've given this life that has infinite value to this new human being. And so it has an infinite score. And if you don't have the abortion, and it turns out you could have. I mean, it wasn't a human life. Then you'll have a suboptimal life, okay? Because now you have the baby, and you didn't have to, but now you've got this baby that you have to take care of. Now, people could argue that even if this issue of human life, whatever, but you could argue that in the future, this child that will be born, you're going to love this child. I mean, I think most parents that are struggling with abortion, who, when the mothers make the decision to not have the abortion, and now they have this child that they are nurturing and loving, almost universally, the mothers are like so grateful that they didn't have the abortion. And of course, the the child, when they find out their mother was considering aborting them, when they were still in the womb, they're so grateful that that didn't happen. So clearly, 20 years later, this baby that's in the womb, who's still forming, 20 years later, they're going to argue that it's good that I'm glad you didn't have the abortion. So when you think about it over time, you have to actually count for the fact that the child would not have wanted to be aborted. All right, so remember that I said the score is a weighted sum of the scores affecting everybody. And, the weighting factor is in some sense the selfishness factor. So if you form your score, let's start with the mother. You form the score and you say, all right, I'm affected, the father of this child is affected, my family's affected, society, the government, how does this having this baby or not having the baby affect society? And then the baby itself. But I'm a selfish mother, and I don't really care about the father, family, society, the baby. I just care about myself. So the weighting for everyone else is 0, and I look at the outcome, for myself, and I form my score that way. And if I believed that I was really murdering my child, my conscience is telling me this is really wrong, this is murder, I'll still not abort the child. But if my conscience is kind of dead and it says, look, it's just a bunch of cells, and my desires tell me, I don't want this baby in me, I want to get rid of it, then that will factor into all of this. And then, of course, you have rewards and penalties. What if abortion was illegal? So that means that, my score, if I do something illegal, I might get put in jail or fined. And so there are all these different factors that affect the score if the mother is making the decision. But if the mother is also factoring in, okay, look, the father has some say into it, my family has some say into it, society, will this child be a drain on society? What would society want? And then what would the baby want? I think, clearly when the mother thinks, what would the baby want? It's pretty hard, I think, for the mother to say, who cares? The baby wants to live, but I'll kill it. I think when the mother starts thinking about the baby, that really, makes the decision pretty obvious. I should not have the abortion. So, pro-abortion, pro-choice, they call it, don't want these mothers talking about their baby. They don't even want to use the word baby. They, fetus or something, the tissue, something like that. Because they know that when the mother starts including the baby in her score, the mother will almost always choose to not have the abortion. All right, so what about the father? The father might think to himself, I want this my girlfriend to have the abortion because I don't want to marry her, and I don't want to be have to pay child support or be some father that I really can't be. And so it actually turns out that women are more in favor of having restrictions on abortion than men. It's kind of an interesting thought, but men are more in favor of, let's just let anybody have abortions than the mothers. It's kind of an interesting thing. Family, I think people feel pressure about families. Sometimes families are so ashamed of what has happened that they want to hide the whole thing and sort of have the abortion secretly, or in some cases, families will even, send the pregnant daughter off to some place where no one knows her so she can have her baby, and then they'll come back and, the family will say, oh, we're adopting this new child, and, it's sort of hiding what was really going on. In fact, one of the churches I used to go to, the pastor's daughter had a child out of wedlock, and they told everybody that she was raped, but she wasn't raped. They were just covering the whole thing up because they didn't want the shame in all of that. So the family definitely, plays a role in this. Society is the most cruel of all of these because society, when I think of society, I think of collectives. And, like for example, China said, oh, we have too many people, so let's abort people. Or society might say, all of these, pregnant women of races that we really don't want in our society, let's kill their babies. All Planned Parenthood was founded by Margaret Sanger, who was a racist. She was a eugenicist, and she was a racist against blacks. And you look at where these abortion centers are located; they're all in minority population areas, and huge percentage, way out of proportion. Black babies and Hispanic babies are being killed, are being aborted. And I remember having a conversation with a psychologist years ago, saying, "Oh yeah, we really want to abort these, like black babies because they're a drain on society, especially to unwed mothers and everything. So, yeah, we don't want that in our society. I mean, it's pure racism, and society won't necessarily look at human life as sacred. They might just simply think, okay, is this going to drain us or is it going to contribute to society? And some, especially, more leftist and progressives, would argue that, look, if you're not contributing to society, we have no use for you, and we should find a way to humanely put an end to your life because, your life has no value to us, and it probably has no value, to yourself. And kind of scary stuff, that way of thinking. Society is can become very, very evil when they look at sort of what is best for society, and they don't really look at humans as individuals with infinite value. They really just look at society. People are expendable. This is really more like the Marxist, authoritarian, dictator kind of way of thinking about things. And then we finally get to the baby. And the baby, it's interesting. The baby, everything from conception, it's trying to grow. It's everything about it. It's trying to survive. It's growing. The process that's taking place. So clearly, it's designed to survive. Does not want to be terminated. But you can kind of say that about any life form. Plants, animals, but they're not human. And so, what makes the baby special? Well, it's not just that it wants to survive, but that it's also human. And, we step back and we would say, again, when does it become human? And how certain are we of that? And it ultimately turns into a probability. And we can argue about that. The reality is nobody knows. The probability is not 0, it's not 1. We should step back and simply say it's finite. So if it was something like 50%, then if 50% chance that this baby is a human being when we abort it, then there's a 50% chance we're committing murder. And then it boils down to, what do we think of human life? How bad is murder? And the sad thing is that I don't think a lot of people who are pro-choice in favor of abortion actually consider human life to be sacred. And you can see that there, with some of the other decisions that they make. Generally, those people would not be religious, because I think it's really more religious people that think of human life as sacred. And, if we want to just be mathematical about this, the definition of sacred life means it has an infinite score to it. So if you murder an infinite life, that's negative infinity in the score. And, ultimately, if the life lives, it has infinite value, right? So it's these extremes of infinity and minus infinity. Now, if you believe that somehow life is sacred, that it's valuable, and I think that a lot of pro-abortion people would argue that, okay, human life is sacred. And the argument is really over, is the baby that's being aborted, the fetus that's being aborted, is that really a human life? And the mistake that they make is they say yes or no. They might say, no, it's not a human life, it's just a clump of cells. But then we should ask, how do you know that? What really is what's the probability that that's true? And going back to this, what we talked about in the beginning, ideology and the Dunning-Kruger effect, you combine that, a rational person should have said, I don't know, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 50% that it's a human being, let's say 3 months into the pregnancy, or maybe it's 70%. But if somebody says, maybe it's 10%, then you would step back and say, all right, you said human life is sacred, it's valuable, murder is infinitely bad. There's a 10% chance you're committing murder. Why would you be, pro-choice? Why would you allow this to happen? Right? Because, but what's really happening is people, when they say, I think it's, 10% it's a human life, 90% it's still just a clump of cells, in their thinking, they act as if it's 100%. They throw out all of the other possible options, and it really goes back to Dunning-Kruger. Way overconfident, way more certain about things that they have no business being certain about. All right, so I've kind of gone through all of these things. I'm sure if you think about this, you can come up with all kinds of other thoughts about abortion, but it boils down to this. You make a decision, and it's based on, is this baby a human? And if so, if you abort the child, it's murder, but it is murdering a human life, maybe that's not so bad. And it also boils down to selfishness. So, go back to the equations, look at the scoring system. Society you might say, okay, it's murder, but who cares? I don't weigh everybody. It's just, what's the benefit to society, right? So the selfishness plays a factor. The mistake of overconfidence in thinking something that you believe to be true, like is this baby a human? When you think it's 100% confidence, that's another mistake. And then the final mistake, or that people make, is actually looking at the human life itself and trying to determine, is it sacred? How valuable actually is it? In other words, maybe killing a human is fine if my life is better. Why? Right? Some people actually think that way. That like a criminal will kill you and rob you and kill you, take all your stuff, and they think, wow, look at this. This is great. I'm rich now. And it doesn't bother them that they just murdered another human being. So anyway, there's lots of mistakes that people make in their thinking about abortion. And with that, let's open this up now for discussion.